Chapter 29-26. Who would have thought that this old village chief is actually that tree vine monster? He can actually pretend to be like this? In front of each of them, he pretends to be a sanctimonious, kind-hearted person, but in the end, the villagers' emotions surge. Each and every one of them is filled with righteous indignation and curses. This was especially true for the families who had lost their children. Their entire family went up to the village chief, kicking and punching him. Lu Zheng separates these ordinary villagers. Don't get too close. This old guy is not a good person. Be careful not to get caught by the ghost claws on his body. Now they can clearly see the true face of this old village chief. They see that the countless ghost claw-like vines on his body have already been chopped into pieces, leaving only the long ghost claw on his neck, trying to struggle. He is a demonic cultivator. Arbor lightly says, "Now can you tell us why you are in this underground village?" An old man shakily steps forward, crying and says, "Immortal, please save us. A few years ago, several monsters that look like humans appeared in our happy village, specifically eating people on sight. The people in the village who can escape have already escaped, leaving behind the old, weak, women and children, about 100 families. They are so poor that they don't even have money to run away. So the old village chief proposed to move our village underground. This way, first, we can effectively stop the man-eating monsters. Second, the safety of the village can also be guaranteed." At that time we all felt that the village chief was wholeheartedly thinking for the village, so we are very grateful to him. Who knows, he is a beast in human face. The woman at the side also cries. Originally we thought that if we moved to the underground, we would definitely not provoke monsters anymore. Who knew that good times don't last long? It has only been a few months since we moved to the underground village. Starting from 4 years ago, every year our village would lose a few boys, all taken away by that tree vine monster. At this point, many people begin to gnash their teeth. We were kept in the dark by this old man for so many years. We still wholeheartedly thought that he is a warm-hearted philanthropist. Arbor sneers. He lied to you more than this. After saying that, he stepped forward and kicked Huerhua. "Lead the way to your nest." Huerhua shuddered from head to toe, and he looked at Xiao Mu in disbelief. How did this little girl know that he had another secret base here? "It should be around that icicle flower tree," Arbor said with certainty. She noticed it when she came down. The area around the ice tree had the densest baleful energy. It was so thick that it could not be dissolved. Arbor glanced at the villagers. "Take off the amulets around your necks." She usually didn't like to explain this and that, but looking at the ignorant eyes of the villagers, she only felt that their stupidity was somewhat pitiful. Do they have to believe whatever others say? He had no judgment at all. He didn't even have a trace of doubt. This isn't a protective talisman at all. Arbor said indifferently, "This is a profound talisman. If you wear it for a long time, the energy will enter your body, and you will be easily controlled by others. Even if your mind is strong enough, your body will continue to deteriorate year by year. Therefore, this Xian talisman was of no benefit to an ordinary person." Hearing this, everyone turned pale with fright. They hurriedly took off the profound talisman from their necks and threw it on the ground. Chapter 29-27. These people belong to the Tian Yun organization. Arbor looks around and says, "To them, this place is just an extremely small stronghold in this organization. And you guys," Arbor looks at them again, "are all their potential test subjects. If you don't believe me, then follow me." Without giving these shocked villagers a chance to ask questions, Arbor turns around and signals Chen Qi and Lu Zheng to carry the old village chief, and Huerhua to follow him. Mo Lian's figure flashes and comes to Arbor's side. The two of them walk very quickly and arrive at the side of the frost-covered tree in a flash. Arbor looks up at the tree. From the outside, the tree seems to be completely fine. But that kind of energy is so dense that it almost can't be dispersed. Lu Zheng throws Huerhua to the ground and kicks him. "Let's do it." Huerhua shudders and turns to look at Arbor and Mo Lian standing behind him. Mo Lian curls her lips into a smile that isn't a smile. "Do you want me to do it for you?" Huerhua shudders again and scrambles forward a few steps. He circles around the ice tree, and sends out a few palm strikes up and down. A jade talisman suddenly jumps out from his sleeve. Like a key, it is embedded in the barrier in front of him. This is really an important place. This barrier is even surrounded by a talisman array. After this talisman array opens, more and more Yin energy seeps out from inside. Normal people naturally can't sense it. Only people with profound cultivation can sense the Yin energy from this kind of Xian Yin talisman array. Arbor cultivates talisman array, and naturally has a bit more perception than normal people. Usually, when he walked around the ice tree, he would only feel that it was a little cold at most. Suddenly, a cloud of black fog floats out from inside the ice tree. It opens its huge mouth like a ghost's head, and rushes to swallow Arbor, who is standing at the front. The speed was so fast that Arbor only had time to put up an eggshell defensive barrier. He didn't have time to do anything else before he was swallowed by the black fog. A pair of cold, scarlet eyes appeared in the black fog. Without any explanation, it opened its mouth and roared at her. With a rumble, it swept towards Arbor like a tidal wave. In the blink of an eye, a barrier formed by black flames was erected in front of Arbor. The vibrations formed by the sound waves were completely isolated and didn't cause any damage to Arbor. Arbor had just removed the defensive barrier on her body when her slender waist was embraced by Emolien. Emolien didn't know if he was comforting her or comforting himself. He hugged her and unconsciously stroked her waist twice. Sir Jojo blinked and turned his head to look at the red-eyed zombie that had suddenly emerged from the black fog. This high-level zombie was different from the 3.5 defective ones from before. Not only could it emit sound waves, but it could also separate its hands from its body. 2 of its arms were about to fly in front of them. Emolien narrowed his cold eyes. Black lotus flowers the size of a fist, carrying cold and merciless killing intent, rose from the ground little by little. The black flames were swallowing the Yin energy around them. Lu Zheng and Chen Qi were isolated from the black fog. The instant the black fog transformed into a giant skeletal ghost face and opened its huge mouth to devour Qiao Mu, they only saw Crown Prince Mo's figure flicker and burrow inside without hesitation. The 2 of them were trying their best to release several bursts of holy power to disperse the ghost fog. Chapter 29-29. The little stoic hastily pulled her husband's hand and pattered over. Sure enough, they saw a pitch-black sinkhole under the ice tree. There was a steep passage inside that led to an unknown place. "I'll go down and take a look," Emolien said as she squeezed her small hand. Arbor vigorously shook her small head. "Let's go together." The little monk hastily grabbed her hand. "Benefactress, I'll go with you. Why are you joining in the fun? Stay here. You can't recite the rebirth incantation of so many people by yourself at such a young age. You have to find a monastery for this." Before Arbor could finish speaking, she saw the little monk shake his small head. This young monk feels that something is off down there. This aura is seriously too insidious. Arbor's mouth couldn't help but twitch. How could this little monk be so comical and adorable? The old monk called himself Old Monk, but he followed the trend and called him Little Monk. Stay here even if it's insidious. Arbor poked his forehead and pulled Emolien down that steep path. "Ba," the little monk grumbled. "Benefactress, you should bring this young monk along. This young monk can help you a bit with a Buddhist CLO. Benefactress. Benefactress. Benefactress was really strange. Why did she seem to be fleeing in defeat? She pulled that Prince Emo down the sinkhole as if she was fleeing. Chen Qizheng, pay attention to your defenses." Arbor tossed out this sentence before leaving. She and Emolien floated down that long, steep staircase. This long staircase was about several hundred meters down. When they reached the bottom, the rocks under their feet were quite painful. Arbor kicked her small feet and creased her brows. Emolien looked down at her. A black fire spread over and melted the rocks several hundred meters in front of her into powder, which then spread out on the ground. Soon, a bit of underground water seeped out from under the powdered rocks, but it didn't affect their walking. Jojo felt that the stone powder was quite comfortable to step on. He looked up at Emolien and said, "There's an underground water source here, right?" Emolien nodded. "I think so. I wonder what's inside." It was reasonable to say that the little monk was quite sharp. If he said that the aura below was sinister, then there must be something extremely disgusting up ahead. Children should watch less of those messy things, lest they get nightmares at night. The two of them moved very quickly. It didn't take long for them to arrive at the front of the passage. They stood in front of a locked iron door. Without another word, Emolien melted that iron door with his fire. Sir Jojo calmly stepped over a puddle of liquid that had been melted by the black fire. Then he frowned. The smell was extremely fishy, causing the two of them to subconsciously take a step back and quickly block off their five senses. The little fellow looked ahead with disdain. It was dark at the end, and there seemed to be a large stone room. After blocking off their five senses, the two of them felt a little better. They ran to the end and saw three strange-looking animals squatting in front of the stone room. Speaking of which, they might not be animals. This was because these three animals all looked very strange. They all had human-like heads, but they were of different sizes. One of them had the body of a lion, another had a pair of eagle wings on its back, and the last one had copper skin and iron bones wrapped in steel rhinoceros skin. The person with the lion's body had a very large head, like a winter melon planted on the lion's body. See you at 12. Chapter 2931. He's an extremely ambitious person. Emolien sighed. If he could set up this trap 100 years ago, it means that this is a mission passed down from generation to generation. A family mission? You could say that. Emolien nodded. Or maybe it's a sect mission, or an aristocratic family, or even a mission passed down from generation to generation. If that's the case, then every major power in the three states is worthy of suspicion. Arbor was speechless. There were at least 800, if not 1,000 big and small powers in the three states. Looking for clues about the heavenly fortune from these powers was like looking for a needle in a haystack. Maybe I'm overthinking it. Emolien smiled and shook her hand. I'll move these bronze statues away. Xiaomu shook her head and said disdainfully. These bronze statues make people feel uncomfortable just by looking at them. How about we shatter them? Emolien turned to look at his little wife and nodded. Okay. Arbor threw him two Vajra talismans and attached them to his hands. After a few punches, the three bronze statues were broken into pieces by the two violent fellows and scattered on the ground. The entrance to the stone room appeared in front of them. The two stepped on the broken statues and entered the stone room hand in hand. Only the sound of two gears turning could be heard. It was an extremely subtle sound. In less than a second, several metal fences came down from behind the two of them. These metal fences rose and fell one after another. For a moment, such sounds came from all around them. Arbor and Emolien stood in the middle of the stone room. They turned to look and found that they were surrounded by metal fences. It was as if they were in a large circular prison. There were vertical fences all around them, and the gaps between the fences were so small that even a baby's hand could not squeeze through. The two of them looked at each other, then looked around. They were sure that they were locked in this metal cage. The stench grew stronger, until an earth-shattering roar rang out. Emolien shielded his wifey as they retreated a few steps back. The two of them looked up at the same time, and saw a monster clinging to the ceiling of the stone room. That pair of small, flickering red eyes were staring at them without blinking. Arbor almost vomited in disgust. Fuck, what the hell is this? It was even more disgusting than a human-faced spider. In any case, the human-faced arachnid was really a spider. Aside from its head that resembled a human, the rest of its body was very strange. It had the slender legs of a spider, and a total of 12 of them. Each of her slender legs was covered with a layer of needle-like fur. Looking at it, one's scalp couldn't help but feel slightly numb. Each of its 12 legs had a small suction cup that allowed it to suck on anything. Xiaomu subconsciously squirmed behind Emolien, her eyes vigilantly gazing at the human-headed spider that was sucking on the ceiling. Hiss! That guy let out a prelude to an attack. Suddenly, it pounced down from the ceiling and opened its mouth to spray a green mucus at the two of them. That liquid fell to the ground and immediately corroded a hole. It could be seen that the poison was very strong. After the human-headed spider realized that its attack had missed, it quickly retreated a few steps. It was very human-like, and vigilantly looked at the two of them. Arbor made a prompt decision. He tore an attack talisman and threw it in its direction. Chapter 2932. But when the attack talismans hit the human-headed spider's body, it was like scratching an itch. There were no sparks at all, and it didn't even leave a white mark on its body. Arbor hurriedly looked up at Emolien. This monster shouldn't have already entered the god realm, right? Emolien pulled him back. This thing's body is full of hidden weapons. You should first open the defensive barrier. Before he could finish his sentence, the human-headed spider launched another attack at them. This time, while it was spitting out mucus from its mouth, its 12 slender spider legs were moving forward very quickly. Its movements were very fast, and in a flash, it had already arrived in front of Prince Mo. The monster's 4 forelimbs were like sickles, cutting in all directions. With a slight twist, it cut towards Arbor's neck. Emolien pulled his Jojo over, and a long staff suddenly appeared in his hand. He swiftly blocked the human-headed spider's slender legs. The slender legs kept twisting in front of Emolien, desperately trying to stab at her. Emolien flipped his hand, and several balls of purple flames abruptly landed on the human-headed spider's 2 slender legs. The long hairy legs crackled as they were being roasted by the purple flames. Suddenly, the hairs on the legs shot out like steel needles. Emolien had already been on guard, and when those steel needles were thrown over, they were blocked by a barrier formed by the purple flames. With a light flip of his hand, the Raven Moon sword in Emolien's hand once again emitted a jet-black luster. A majestic sword intent appeared in the air, and with unparalleled speed and power, it cut towards the hairy-legged spider in front of them. This human-headed spider was also a clever one, and it immediately felt that the situation was very bad. The sword intent that burst out from this guy in front of it almost instantly made it timid, and it immediately wanted to retreat. But it was a pity that this was a huge cage surrounded by iron fences. Where could this human-headed spider retreat to? When it retreated, it realized that its path of retreat had already been blocked. This huge sword intent was right in front of it, and a black flame was burning behind it. It burned quietly but brilliantly, and the thick black color made it tremble from the bottom of its heart. Hiss, 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 hiss. The creature roared loudly. Its 12 slender legs were hesitant to move forward or backward. It was difficult for it to move forward. Emolien naturally wouldn't give it much time to consider. She waved her right hand slightly, and a majestic sword intent descended from the sky, rapidly approaching the human-headed spider. Hiss! The human-headed spider let out a mournful cry. Arbor came out from behind Emolien and stole a glance at the thing. He was so disgusted that goosebumps appeared all over his body. This thing was still spitting out green mucus from its mouth, because its chin was being forcefully pressed against by Emolien's sword intent. Every ball of mucus dripped onto its body due to the distance. The human-headed spider with a body of copper skin and iron bones was actually corroding itself to the point of howling. Arbor looked at this scene and couldn't help but want to laugh. The sword intent that Emolien had summoned was using a slow speed that was visible to the naked eye to slowly disintegrate this human-headed spider. Its little red eyes revealed a look of fear. Originally, it wanted to shrink back a little, but the blazing black fire behind it caused it to shiver all over. It clearly looked like a faint wisp of black flame, but it had such power. I coughed. Oh, I just ate loquat paste. I can't take it anymore. Chapter 2933. In just a moment, she discovered to her horror that her 2 slender legs had been completely melted by the pitch-black sword intent. Its remaining 7 or 8 legs couldn't help but tremble. They watched as its body disappeared inch by inch under the huge black sword. Finally, the sword intent pierced through the human-headed spider's body and sent it flying. It heavily smashed through several iron fences. It flew out and crashed into the wall of the stone room, creating a loud rumbling sound. A faint black flame burned on its face, causing it to let out heart-wrenching screams. After a few minutes, the man's cries slowly died down. Only a pile of black powder was left in the corner. Nothing else could be seen. Just as the 2 of them flew out of the thin fence with a hole in it, they saw the entire roof of the stone room collapse. A loud bang resounded throughout the entire stone chamber. Between the stone ceiling and the ground, there was not the slightest gap. If he didn't have the ability to escape from it, he would have turned into mincemeat by now. The two of them hurriedly left this stone room and walked into the stone room next door. These 3 stone chambers were connected. The human-headed arachnid's room was the largest stone room in the center. There were 2 smaller stone rooms on the left and right. As soon as Arbor stepped in, he quickly retreated. Even though he blocked his 5 senses, he was still shocked by the disgusting scene in front of him. This was the place where the heavenly fate created people. As soon as he walked in, he saw strings of people hanging on the walls. It would be more appropriate to call them puppets now. Just like hanging sausages and bacon, these people were also hung on the 3 walls in different categories. Their limbs were all twisted and grotesque. Although everyone was breathing weakly, it was obvious that they were no longer conscious. There were men and women among them. There were even 4 or 5 old people, and a child who was missing a leg. The scene was almost too horrible to look at. Even someone like Arbor, who had experienced 2 lifetimes, felt extremely miserable. He didn't want to look at it a second time. Moreover, the little monk was only a child. It was better to avoid such a bloody scene. The layout of the 2 stone rooms on the left and right were basically the same. In the middle were rows of medicinal troughs, and beside them were piles of inferior herbs. Inside a black medicine furnace, a tiny flame was burning. There was a small bowl next to it, and there was still some residue left in it. Emolienne sighed and looked at the people hanging on the wall. She reached out and pulled the little girl to her side. "Let's go. Ask Mr. Su to take over and deal with these people." Even if these test subjects were saved, they wouldn't be able to live for long. When the time came, let them die with some dignity. Could it be that the mutated medicine made by Tian Yun was extracted from some animals and plants? It shouldn't be that simple. Emolienne shook her head. But from the looks of it, they're still improving their medicine. That human-headed spider should also be one of Tian Yun's test subjects. Whether it was in terms of strength or speed, the human-headed spider was undoubtedly a success. It was very powerful, but it had also become a mindless, zombie-like monster. What was the point of such a change? This should be the improved medicine that they concocted. Emolienne lowered his eyes. Chapter 2935. Emolienne was still hesitating whether to kill him or wait for Mr. Su to come over and bring him over for research. She saw several people rush forward, punching and kicking the old village chief without saying a word. It was obvious that the villagers who were deceived by him hated the old village chief to the core. At this moment, they really wanted to eat his blood and bite his flesh. Arbor looked at this group of angry villagers and sighed. He turned his head and said, "Let's go." Emolienne nodded, turned her head and lightly ordered, "You two take some people and rescue those people who are hanging on the wall. When Chia and Darkshang bring Mr. Su over, hand over all the tools in the stone room to him." "Yes." 2 responses immediately sounded from a place where no one was around. Not long after Emolienne and the others left, several black-clothed youths led people down the stone stairs. Not long after, the entire underground village was filled with the cries of the villagers. Those who were rescued and on the verge of death, none of them were spared. Almost all of them were exhaling more than they were inhaling. These people were the relatives and friends of the villagers. All these years, because of the old village chief's deceit, they all felt like they were in a dream. They didn't suspect the old village chief at all. But they didn't expect that the most honest person was the monster who stole their family members. As long as they thought of the words of those youths, they understood that their family members were used as test subjects in that evil stone room all these years and suffered endless suffering. They couldn't help but feel sad. The atmosphere in the entire underground village was very depressing. Sigh. Lu Jing couldn't help but sigh. "I really didn't expect that after us 2 old brothers muddled through so many years, the world would have such earth-shaking changes." Tian Yun, this organization, didn't know when it appeared. In the 3 continents, how many places like this underground village base were there? It couldn't be that their bases were everywhere, and there were eyes everywhere, coldly looking at them in the gloomy darkness. Thinking of this, Chen Qi couldn't help but shrug his shoulders and tremble slightly. Seeing the villagers hugging the corpses of their loved ones and crying bitterly, to be honest, they felt rather uncomfortable. They were all humans, but the Sky Fate organization actually treated them like puppets and manipulated them. This was truly perverted. Arbor shook his head. If only they were a little bit more cautious. If he had been vigilant from the beginning, perhaps he wouldn't have been fooled by an old village chief. Let's have them settle down properly. Emolian squeezed Xiao Mu's small hand as he looked up at the rosy clouds that towered into the clouds. They had been tossing and turning for the whole night, and the sky was starting to brighten. The rosy clouds peak in front of him seemed to be bathed in a layer of milky white light, exuding a holy white light. Clouds rose, and white mist filled the air. The faintly discernible peaks of the mountains were like young girls covered in white gauze, graceful and graceful. The rosy clouds peak was the tallest peak in the middle, and there were 12 other peaks surrounding it. A silvery white waterfall poured down from the rosy clouds peak, like 10,000 horses galloping, and the roaring sound of water could be heard from far away. Whoosh whoosh. Before Arbor could react, he saw 2 eggs hurriedly flying out of the paradise, jumping and cheering toward the waterfall. Chapter 2936. This place was this good? Arbor blinked and turned to look at her husband. Even little Bai An's egg could sense the rich spirit energy here, and impatiently flew out of the paradise on its own. With 2 flaps, it dashed straight into that waterfall. Lu Jing jumped in fright and hastily shouted, "Second sect master, pay attention. That waterfall on Red Cloud Peak looks like it's filled with spirit energy, but it's actually not. Second sect master, the waterfall is actually filled with holy power, so we don't dare to rashly jump in and try. Hurry and bring your eggs back, or else we'll really lose everything." Emolian's mouth twitched inexplicably. What was going on? Why did his words give people the urge to beat this Chen Qi to death? The little stoic expressionlessly glanced at them. "My 2 eggs haven't been able to hatch. If they can hatch in this waterfall, then it'll really be excellent." Chen Qi and Lu Zheng looked at each other in dismay. "Second sect master, what are these 2 eggs? Holy beast Bai An's eggs." The 2 old men were only casually asking, but the answer they received almost made them drop their jaws. It couldn't be right? This little fellow was carrying 2 holy beast Bai An's eggs with her? Look at those fist-sized eggs hopping into the waterfall and roaming around with incomparable joy. How enviable was her appearance. This waterfall couldn't really cleanse her entire body and absorb holy power at the same time, right? Seeing that the old man Chen Qi was itching to give it a try, Arbor expressionlessly said, "Let's go to Red Cloud Peak first." The 2 people instantly wilted and turned around to look at Xiao Mu. The little stoic muttered in a low voice, "They're already so old, yet they still don't know how to be calm. They're like 2 eggs and still want to hop back and forth. It's simply hilarious." Chen Qi and Lu Zheng looked at each other. The little stoic spoke so loudly that they could all hear it, "Okay?" The 4 people swiftly ascended Red Cloud Peak with the little monk. When Chen Qi saw the palace with a glazed roof, green tiles, and a mottled outer wall, his eyes couldn't help but brim with tears. "Yes, it's here, second sect leader. This is the location chosen by our Xuanji school's first-generation master." Chen Qi began to cry. When the old man cried, Lu Zheng also thought about how he had wasted so many years. If he took all of it, he could accompany his junior martial sister to travel around, or he could stay at Red Cloud's Peak and continue to develop the sect. It would be much more meaningful than wasting so many years doing nothing. Arbor rubbed the little monk's head. The small monk then took out 2 square handkerchiefs from his small pocket. He handed one to Chen Qi and the other to Lu Zheng, and said seriously, "Benefactors, don't cry. You 2 aren't the most miserable people in the world. Compared to those poor villagers just now, you should know. A healthy body with 4 limbs is more beautiful than anything else." Just like that, Chen Qi and Lu Zheng's little bit of nostalgia for the sect that had just been brewing was interrupted by the little monk. Arbor found it a bit funny and lowered his head to rub the little monk's bald head. He turned to Chen Qi and Lu Zheng and said, "I want to leave the 6 mountain peaks on the left for the holy water sect to use. I will use a formation to separate the 2 sections. This part will be the Xuanji school's territory, and the other will be the holy water sect's territory. What do you think? Chen Qi expressed that he didn't have any objections and nodded before saying something heart-wrenching. Our Xuanji school only has 3 people in total. Second sect leader, do as you wish. Bye. Wait until I get better and return to normal. Oh. Chapter 2937. Arbor was instantly speechless. Although these 2 old men were indeed speaking the truth, they were too blunt. If a sect only had 3 people including the sect master, people would probably laugh their heads off if they heard about it. Second sect master, you know how to set up formations? Once Lu Zheng mentioned formations, his interest in conversation was piqued. Arbor swept him a glance and silently summoned the mechanism diagram from his conscious. I'll set up a simple Great Barrier formation between the left and right mountain peaks. What do you think? Lu Zheng wanted to cry a bit. He had painstakingly created this mechanism diagram for many years, pouring his heart and soul into it. Each of the 18 formation diagrams inside was the best of the best. He originally wanted to show off to Chen Qi when he sparred with him. But when he thought of this, he inwardly vomited blood again. He forced a bitter expression and said, "This place is too big. If I want to set up a barrier formation, this little formation diagram probably won't be of much use." "Oh, then you do it." Xiao Mu silently put away that matrix map and went with the flow to say this. "Lian, let's go eat." "Thank you for your trouble, Elder Lu. I'll give you 4 hours to set up the Great Barrier Formation." Sir Jojo expressionlessly walked past the old man and turned to clench his small fist at him. "Work hard." Lu Zheng was stupefied. On the side, Chen Qi couldn't resist bursting out in laughter. Lu Zheng's deflated appearance was truly too hilarious. He had been old brothers with this old fellow for several hundred years, but he had never seen him so helpless and deflated. As expected, the little stoic sect master was a talent. She could infuriate Lu Zheng, this old man, to the point of hopping about with just a few words. The 2 of them pushed open the door and walked into the palace whose outer walls were rather mottled. Inside the empty main hall, light red gauze curtains hung everywhere. As the cold wind drifted in from outside the window, the gauze curtains fluttered gently. Arbor pulled Emolien around the main hall for a stroll. The furnishings in the hall were also quite old, and they looked quite exquisite. Arbor pulled Emolien along and strolled around the back of the palace. The Xuanji Palace was quite big. As long as they found some people to repair it a little and change some clean living equipment, they would be able to move in directly. Xiao Mu thought of those 2 idle sect elders and decided to hand over the work of repairing and purchasing items to those 2 to handle. Achoo achoo. Chen Qi sneezed twice, rubbed his nose, and walked to the side. From his vantage point, he could only see a waterfall that looked like a silver dragon descending rapidly. The 2 eggs were jumping and rolling in the pool under the waterfall, as if they were very comfortable, and kept rubbing against each other. Chen Qi could not help but click his tongue in wonder. He turned back and continued to watch Lu Zheng set up the isolation formation. According to the second sect master's intention, after the 2 sects were isolated, the rosy cloud's peak in the middle would be the hub connecting the 2 sections. They would open up a path on the side for people to come and go. This path was far away from the Xuanji Palace. Even if people came and went, it would not affect the palace. Lu Zheng leaped into the air. His palms were covered with dense saint energy. Nobody could see how he moved his arms, but one by one, huge boulders were moved from the mountain peaks in all directions. Following that were flowers, trees, branches, sand, and so on, dancing in the air. One after another, large trees with twisted roots were sucked in by his palms and transplanted here. Chapter 2938. When Arbor walked over with a unique little food box and a piece of apple, her eyes lit up when she saw the scenery in front of her. Great Elder Lu was indeed a formation master, who had lived for hundreds of years. In less than 2 hours, he had actually changed the appearance of Rosy Cloud's Peak. Rosy Cloud's Peak was now divided into yin and yang by him using flowers, trees, and stones. The formation plates were buried in the 4 corners. The Xuanji Palace where Arbor lived was located facing the sun. Not only was there plenty of light, but it was also modified to be warm in winter and cool in summer. The path in the middle was completely blocked off with flowers and trees. While she was eating, Great Elder Lu had transplanted the entire bamboo forest from one of the mountain peaks to this place. In this way, the Xuanji Palace was completely located in the depths of the bamboo forest and wouldn't be disturbed by the passage at all. As for the passage connecting the two sects, Great Elder Lu had also made it very imposing. Not only did he use large stones to build a stone bridge, but he also introduced a waterfall that meandered along the stone bridge. The two paths were filled with the fragrance of plants, birds, and flowers. In the middle was a small bridge with flowing water. It was very unique. Arbor was very satisfied with Great Elder Lu's skill in setting up formations. Although her face was still paralyzed, the little fellow walked over and placed the food box in front of Elder Lu. She said expressionlessly, "There's a pot of plum blossom wine inside." Elder Lu hurriedly took the food box, removed the veil, and chuckled as he took his food and sat to the side. Chen Qi saw this and hurried over. He couldn't help but sigh as he ate. The food cooked by the second-generation sect master is really mediocre, but the wine he makes is really good. Lu Zheng nodded. Beside him, he couldn't help but open his mouth and crawl up from the ground. Chen Qi also hurriedly stood up and turned to look. He couldn't help but reveal the same shocked expression as Lu Zheng. He saw Arbor standing on the stone bridge. With a move of her finger, pieces of glowing white jade talismans flew out from her inner world. The isolation talisman formation was set on top of the isolation formation, set up by Elder Lu. Once it was added, the mountain peaks on both sides became more and more humid. The visibility of cultivators was almost no more than 1 meter. After Arbor finished setting up the isolation array on both sides, he began to set up 2 mystic guiding array glyphs. These 2 mystic guiding talisman matrices could endlessly absorb all the spiritual energy within a radius of several hundred kilometers before distributing it to the Xuanji sect and the Holy Water sect. Qiu Xiaomu instructed, "Go plant that shielding tree." "All right." A little treant suddenly jumped out from Paradise Planet, carrying 2 main branches of the essence concealing tree on its small shoulders. Behind him, there was also a little water baby and a little dirt lump jumping around. Master Silver, let's go nourish this shielding tree and make it grow faster." Arbor nodded and watched the 3 of them leave through the tunnel. Once this isolation glyph array was activated, it would be impossible to open this passageway that connected the 2 sects unless it was someone with a key. Arbor held a jade talisman in his hand, which was the key to open the isolation array. She could create a key like this with a casual drawing. She had as many as she wanted. The Holy Water sect still had to live their own lives. All the senior sisters needed to continuously train and grow in order to keep up with the cultivators of the Divine Province. After setting up the mystic guiding talisman formation, what made Lu Zheng and Chen Qi's jaws drop was that this wasn't the end. Chapter 2940. Of course, Arbor had also run to Fish Orchid Planet to draw thousands of defensive talismans while she was eating. Only then did she manage to gather enough talismans. Blinking his large eyes, Sir Jojo turned to Emolien and said, "Lien, the blank jade talismans have all been used up." "It's all right. I've already instructed them to speed up the production. I'll have them send them to the academy in the next 2 days." Arbor nodded her little head vigorously. Most of the defensive talismans around her had been used up, and she only had about 100 defensive talismans left. It was really too little. Chen Qi and Lu Zheng perked up their ears to eavesdrop on their conversation. They couldn't help but look at each other silently and ask in unison, "Second Sect Master, you didn't draw all these talismans, did you?" Second Sect Master was a strange talisman master. Wasn't he a little different from other talisman masters? Other talisman masters would dawdle for an entire afternoon and successfully draw 1 or 2 talismans. It was already considered good, but Second Sect Master had taken out 8,688 defensive jade talismans just now. Don't ask them how they knew. They had all been counting silently in their hearts. Based on the average talisman master's speed of drawing 2 talismans a day, they could only draw 700 talismans a year. Second Sect Master's 8,000 jade talismans Wouldn't other people take more than 10 years to draw them? Was this normal? Xiaomu gazed at the two people in bewilderment. Before they could continue asking, she said, Elders, that Jade Star Palace of mine seems to have been around for quite some time already, right? The two elders' eyelids twitched violently. Now that this sect leader has returned, repairing the residence has become the first priority. She turned her head to look at the two old men. Go find a few craftsmen and renovate the palace inside and out. Change all the furniture that should be changed. If I have time, I'll come back and stay for a while. In the future, this would be her other residence outside of the Eastern Palace. Chun-Chi opened his mouth and found that the words that came out of his mouth had become an obedient response. Okay, my ass. He was an elder of the Xuanji sect. When did he become a servant? Since when did purchasing supplies and repairing the palace become his job? Chun-Chi was speechless. He turned his head and glared at Arbor. After Arbor finished dealing with the double defensive array, he pinched his fingers, and a rumbling sound came from outside the defensive array. Now the talisman formation that she had set up could be activated according to her thoughts. The opening and closing of the talisman all depended on her handprint. There was no need to use the jade talisman as a key. Arbor and Emolien crossed the stone bridge side by side and arrived at one of the peaks. Second Martial Uncle, are you coming out now? Arbor asked Yang Shirong a few times, and when he heard her say yes, he pulled her out of the fish orchid planet. Yang Shirong had already found out from Little Tree that Arbor had chosen an excellent location for the sect. She was extremely excited. The moment she stepped out, Yang Shirong felt an abundance of spiritual energy surging around her body. Next, she felt that the scenery in front of her was picturesque. Every peak was like a beautiful garden. There were mountains, rivers, stones, and trees. She just needed to find a few craftsmen and polish them. Second Martial Uncle, how about we settle down here in the future? The spiritual energy here was very rich. The spiritual energy that had been drawn in from hundreds of kilometers away was all absorbed by the mystic energy guiding talisman formation. In less than a second, the 13 peaks with the red clouds peak as the center were surrounded by dense spiritual energy. Chapter 2941. More than half of the spiritual energy absorbed by the mystic energy guiding talisman matrix, from a radius of several hundred kilometers, was drawn into the defensive array surrounding the 13 peaks of Rosy Cloud's Peak. The remaining spiritual energy was truly unable to be absorbed by the 13 peaks, and it looked like it was about to slowly dissipate again. However, Sir Jojo adhered to the principle of frugality and called the sapling Chio back. He had it absorb the remaining spiritual energy to replenish the spiritual energy consumed by the paradise. Yang Shirong excitedly strolled around the mountain peak. She held Arbor's small hand and repeatedly nodded as she said, Jojo, you really have a good eye for choosing a location. Judging from the spiritual energy gathered around this place, it must be a naturally formed spirit domain. Arbor pursed his small lips. In reality, this spirit domain might not have had so much spiritual energy inside before. It was mainly due to the two mystic energy guiding talisman matrices and the defensive array surrounding it that all the spiritual energy was locked inside. An endless stream of spiritual energy was absorbed by the mystic energy guiding talisman matrix, and very little spiritual energy dissipated. As a result, the spiritual energy density of this entire mountain peak could be said to have reached its peak. Arbor released Jiangqi, Yu Gui, and the other senior sisters from the paradise. Chun-Chi, who was originally calmly drinking wine on the side, abruptly spat out a mouthful of wine. Fuck, he never knew that his second-generation sect master had so many people by her side. These people couldn't have all been stored inside her storage talisman, right? Yang Shirong already had some understanding of seniors Chun-Chi and Lu Zheng in Paradise Planet. She walked up and cupped her hands in greeting. Seniors, Yang Shirong from the Holy Water sect greets you. When Chun-Chi and Lu Zheng heard the little stoic sect master call her Aunt Master, they knew she was naturally close to them. Hence, they didn't put on airs and cupped their hands with a smile, greeting Yang Shirong. Sparks of curiosity still danced in Chun-Chi's eyes. The second-generation sect master stored all of you inside the storage talisman? Isn't it stuffy to be cooped up inside the storage talisman all day long? Yang Shirong thought about it but still said, I'll let Jojo tell you personally. When Chen Qi and Lu Zheng heard this, they knew better than to ask any further. Arbor walked up to them and pointed at the senior sisters, who were excitedly planning the mountain peaks and how to build them. He said to Yang Shirong, Second Ant Master, the Holy Water Sect shouldn't lack any of the 3 peaks. Let's just establish 3 peaks, okay? However, if senior sisters wish to study together, they can also gather on another mountain peak. Yang Shirong naturally nodded in agreement. The 4th peak over there will be named Learning Peak. If everyone wants to cultivate together, we can go there. Arbor nodded. Let's call the 5th mountain the Sky Peak. It's time for our Maple Pavilion to return. Yang Shirong had already visited the Maple Pavilion on Paradise Planet. When she heard this, she looked at the child with emotion. The Maple Pavilion had a total of 7 floors, and there were many treasures inside. Jojo had owned the Maple Pavilion for so long, but he had not touched a single thing. This child's mind was too pure. Arbor had her own set of principles for handling matters. No one should think of coveting what belonged to her. She wouldn't take more than what didn't belong to her. Since the items inside the sect were passed down from the Holy Water Sect, they naturally belonged to everyone. Now that the Holy Water Sect had reopened its doors to accept disciples, the Maple Pavilion naturally had to return them to their rightful jade bracelet on her wrist. This key is still with you. Chapter 2942. This is what your master left for you, so it's yours. Young Shirong pats her little hand. In the future, if a disciple performs well in the sect, we'll follow the rules and let her go to Maple Pavilion to choose spiritual techniques, spiritual weapons, and so on. Arbor thinks for a moment and says, there are quite a few profound-level mystic weapons inside. It's time to change them. She takes out a storage talisman and hands it to Yang Shirong. Second Uncle Master, when are you going to tidy it up? This is half of the compensation given by the Mu family's first branch. I didn't look through the mess. What spirit stones, spiritual techniques, spiritual weapons, and medicinal herbs. I reckon they're not of the best quality. Just make do with it for now. Yang Shirong twitches her mouth. She doesn't know if Jojo feels guilty when he says this. She feels that the Mu family's first branch must be bleeding from the bottom of their hearts when they handed over the compensation. Little junior sister. Fong Su, the little cannon, runs over excitedly and points to the back of the mountain. There are several rows of caves on the back of the mountain. The spiritual energy inside is extremely dense. Do you want to go take a look? These fellows ran one round all over the mountains and plains, and actually already found several good cultivation places. Seeing that they are in high spirits, Arbor nods and follows them. Sure enough, there are a series of small caves formed naturally on the back of the mountain. It's just big enough for one person to sit cross-legged and cultivate. Emo Lien exclaims and steps forward to look up. She can't help but mutter to herself, this place can actually form a natural cultivation place. Hey, it's really not bad. Look, there's a wind gap here. The wind comes from there and naturally turns a corner, bringing with it surging spiritual energy. As it blows for a long time, the spiritual energy keeps seeping in and actually formed many small caves. Chun Chi points in the direction of the back of the mountain. The passage they just passed by is relatively narrow, like a slender gourd. When they turn around, they immediately see an open space on the mountain. This cultivation place has the densest spiritual energy among the 6 peaks. It's really good to cultivate here. This is the first peak. Yang Shirong makes a decision. Then, he led the group of disciples and named the 2 peaks to the left and right as the second peak and the third peak. Sky Peak and Learning Peak were neighbors. The last peak was named Divine Water Peak by everyone and was used as the main peak. Yang Shirong happily pulled all the disciples to planning to first plant a row of bamboo forest on the main peak. The little stoic opened her small mouth. She thought of the bamboo forest Lu Zheng transplanted at the top of Red Cloud Peak, then looked at the bare land on Holy Water Peak. It was obvious that a row of bamboos had been planted here before Lu Zheng rubbed his nose. Second Sect Master, do you want to plant a plum blossom outside the Xuanji Palace? That's fine too. The little stoic nodded and casually said, we'll return to the academy now. Elders, don't forget your mission. Hurry up and find the 101 first-generation disciples. Our Holy Water sect has at least 200 people. The little stoic said expressionlessly. Your Xuanji sect should at least give me 20 people. Was this a high requirement? It wasn't high at all right? Second Sect Master, don't worry. After we finish repairing the Xuanji Palace, we'll descend the mountain and immediately search everywhere. I believe that we'll definitely find many disciples in time. Chapter 2943. Arbor grunted and turned to look at Yang Shirong and the others. Second Martial Ant, if there's anything, we can contact each other through the transmission talisman. Okay. Yang Shirong smiled and nodded. It will take some time for the sect's construction to be completed. Don't worry about us. You can go and do your own things. Little junior sister, take care. Little junior sister, if you're tired from studying in the academy, come back and play for a few days. Everyone gave instructions at once. Yang Shirong then said, after our sect is finished, I'll bring them to the great north-facing forest to gain experience. Arbor nodded. Gaining experience was definitely an essential part of cultivation. Many Xiozha who had grown up in large aristocratic families would suffer great losses in battle because they did not have enough experience. After giving Yang Shirong and the others a few more simple instructions, Arbor then went to the waterfall with Emo Lien to look for the 2 Swanee eggs that were happily swimming in the water. The little monk reached out to hold the corner of Qiaomu's skirt as he jogged with her on his short legs. Benefactress, this young monk is unfamiliar with this place, so you mustn't abandon this young monk, okay? I didn't say I'd leave you behind. Arbor looked down at the little monk. But if you return to the academy with me, wouldn't that be too eye-catching? The little monk pursed his soft diamond-shaped lips. His little handsome face was full of seriousness. Arbor saw his tense expression and couldn't help but want to laugh. She raised her hand to rub his head and said, I'll send you to a good place. When you want to see me, you can come out and see me anytime. How's that? When the little monk heard the first half of her sentence, he couldn't help but want to cry. After hearing the entire sentence, he couldn't help but feel a little puzzled. Benefactress, don't go back on your words. Arbor waved her hand and had Little Tree bring the little monk into Paradise Planet first. Meanwhile, she and Emolien were standing above the waterfall, looking down at the 2 hickory eggs leaping about in the pool. Come up, Arbor roared. After tossing around for so long, they still didn't hatch. She was happy for nothing. Whoosh, whoosh, 2 rays of light, one black and one purple, flashed, and the 2 eggs quietly fell into Arbor's palm. Could it be due to the lack of saint energy? Arbor's eyes flickered as he looked at Emolien, who was standing beside him. Emolien nodded. That's very likely. Look at these 2 eggs. They have absorbed almost all of the scattered saint energy in the pool. It's obvious that they need the support of the saint power to break out of their shells. Arbor reached out and knocked on the 2 balls, then stroked them. Forget it. Let's not dwell on this for now. Above the 3 prefectures, even the deity domain was hard to find, let alone the saint domain, which was a treasure trove that could only be found by chance. Perhaps the place where Rotten Peach Blossom had stayed before was a holy region. However, every time the venerable immortal talked about this place, his face looked as if he had eaten a fly. He always liked to use a simple word to summarize it: boring. What kind of place was this to make him so resentful? To the point where he used the word boring to describe the saint domain. Arbor took back the Swanee eggs. Emolien called out Little Seven. The 2 of them rode on the golden dragon and quickly returned to the academy. When Arbor went to the cultivation hall to cancel her leave, it was already the 3rd day. Her 2 small eyebrows were knitted together as she thought about the 2 stingy instructors in the cultivation hall, who knew how they would deduct her contribution points. Chapter 2944. At this time, all the students in the various halls should be in class, so walking on the academy road was very quiet. After Emolien returned to the academy, no one knew what she was busy with. Arbor didn't follow up and ask, so she decided to go to the cultivation hall to cancel her leave. After all, 500 contribution points were deducted a day, so if she was late for a day, she would lose 500 more. Even though she had 30,000 contribution points left, she couldn't afford to lose 500 points a day like this. When she arrived at the cultivation hall's gate, Arbor's gaze suddenly fell on a person sitting in the middle of the lawn. This person was sitting in front of the cultivation hall's gate, lazily leaning against the back of the chair. His legs were very unruly, as if he was waiting for her here. But Arbor was very clear that she didn't know this person. She was probably a little face-blind, but her memory had never been that bad. She would at least have some impression of people she had met before. This young man in front of her, who she had no impression of, was probably someone she had never met before. Arbor walked straight to the teacher's office area, but unexpectedly, that person stretched out a long leg and blocked her way. Arbor's eyes narrowed dangerously. Her cold gaze was like a sharp arrow, suddenly shooting towards the man in the chair. Crown Princess, you've really made me wait for a long time. When Su Shihua saw this kind of gaze, he couldn't help but be slightly taken aback. Then, he returned to his lazy and unbridled appearance when they first met. What's the matter? Crown Princess probably doesn't know a small person like me. Su Shihua stood up and looked at her with a smile that wasn't a smile. This person had a fair and handsome face, and his appearance wasn't bad. But when he looked at people with his slender eyes, it clearly made people feel a little uncomfortable. This kind of sizing up gaze made it seem as if Arbor was a commodity in his eyes, which made Arbor unhappy. Indeed, I don't know you. Xiao Mu coldly interrupted the latter half of his words. If all the cats and dogs in the world were like you, introducing themselves to me every time they stopped me on the road, then wouldn't I be busy to death? Su Shihua didn't expect that the little girl wouldn't give him any face. There was a hint of anger in his eyes as he sneered and said, I'm a senior of the cultivation hall. I just came out of seclusion 2 days ago. I've heard some people in the academy talk about the crown princess, and I feel that your skills should be pretty good. How about it? Are you interested in sparring with this Su? That's good. Let me have a taste of the crown princess's skills. Su Shihua looked at the woman in front of him gloomily. If they were to make a move later, he would definitely ruthlessly humiliate this little girl. The little girl was still young, but her figure looked really good. Su Shihua's gaze wandered around Arbor's body, and his eyes revealed a bit of calculation and malice. Who asked her to humiliate his sister Su Shitao in the despondent pavilion? After Tao returned home, not only was his eldest brother grounded, but she was also tormented and almost died from illness. Arbor naturally saw the sparks of hatred dancing in Su Shihua's eyes, but she was still a bit puzzled. After all, she had long forgotten about the matter of Princess Tao in the despondent pavilion. How could she connect the two together? Arbor's eyes swept over him coldly. You really want to fight with me? This disdainful tone completely infuriated Su Shihua. Just because I call you the crown princess, you really think you're high and mighty? Your status hasn't been decided yet. Chapter 2945. To tell the truth, Arbor didn't want to pay attention to this idiot. She came to find an instructor to cancel her leave, so she didn't have the time to bicker with this idiot. Arbor immediately circled around his stool with small steps, unwilling to even spare him a glance out of the corner of her eye. Su Shihua was thoroughly enraged. He abruptly kicked the stool next to him and darted to the side, blocking in front of Arbor again. Ever since he became famous, no one had dared to be so impudent in front of him. So what if she was the crown princess? In this world, strength reigned supreme. His teacher had once said that he, Su Shihua, was destined to be a dragon among men, and would certainly ascend to mystique venerable rank within 300 years. Ever since he entered this academy, he had always been admired, because he had already reached the peak of the 15th level of the spirit realm, at the mere age of 21. He didn't know how many female shoujo were rushing in front of him. Moreover, Su Shihua was the kind of man with a glib tongue. He usually played like a fish in water among female cultivators, and the number of women who wanted to become his partner could line up from the Imperial Academy all the way to the great north-facing forest. He had always thought highly of himself, so he simply couldn't tolerate Arbor's attitude toward him. The status of female cultivators in the upper 3 provinces truly wasn't high. Due to innate restrictions, only 10 or 20% of female cultivators could perfectly pass the 5 spirits reincarnation trial and break through to the god realm. In the eyes of Su Shihua and many male cultivators, female cultivators should obediently submit to men. This was in accordance with the rules of the upper 3 provinces. A stoic face like the little stoic, who could draw hatred wherever she went, immediately infuriated Su Shihua. He summoned a long saber with a blue watery glow from his conscience, and slashed it in Arbor's direction without another word. Refusing a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit. Su Shihua's eyes flashed with a cold glint. You're merely a future crown princess whose status hasn't been confirmed, yet you dare to be so impudent in front of Senior. His Highness the Crown Prince truly doesn't know how to teach women. Su Shihua sneered. Since that was the case, then he would take His Highness the Crown Prince's place to properly teach this woman, who didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth, a lesson. He would teach her a principle. In the upper 3 continents, identity didn't mean everything. The saber landed on the ground in the courtyard, leaving a long white mark. Su Shihua shouted angrily. The moment his saber slashed through the air, he couldn't help but frown slightly. How did that last dodge it? It was strange that he couldn't see her movements. However, even if he was slightly faster, there was no way he could escape from him. He was a level 15 Great Spirit Master, and possessed 8 levels of the Water Spirit. For ordinary people, Being able to comprehend 6 levels of the 5 spirit origins was already not bad. Of course, Su Shihua didn't know that what Arbor had comprehended was the source of holy water. It had long since surpassed the 9th level of spirit water. At this time, Su Shihua still had great confidence in himself. He raised the long saber in his hand and encircled the long saber with both hands, completely enveloping it. Immediately afterwards, he leaped forward and arrived in front of Qiao Mu. His eyes flashed, and the long saber slashed at the hem of her skirt. This despicable thing. Arbor glanced at him coldly and dodged his blade with extreme speed. You're courting death. This man's objective was too clear. Did he want to make a fool of Jojo? Did he want to seize the opportunity to rip apart her clothes and expose her to others? Haha, naive guy. Just let him suffer the consequences of his own actions. Chapter 2946. Qiao Mu's fury was completely enraged. Originally, she didn't want to cause so much trouble and just ignored this lowly man in front of her, who knew that when she wanted to settle the matter peacefully, the other party would keep pushing her. She, Arbor, had never been a person who was afraid of trouble. She just found it troublesome. However, since the other party wanted to die so badly, then she would fulfill his wish. Su Shihua felt that the aura of the girl in front of him had completely changed in an instant. Previously, she still had a lazy attitude. Now, she was like a little hedgehog with countless spikes all over her body. Her pair of cold eyes contained a fierce light as she coldly stared at him without blinking. This gaze made his heart inexplicably skip a beat. At the same time, he felt that he was actually frightened by the little girl's gaze. It was really intolerable. Su Shihua was a little angry from embarrassment. He couldn't help but sneer. Arbor, today let me teach you the principles of being a person. Don't be too ruthless in everything. Women should be more obedient. Don't force yourself to do everything. Su Shihua's words were full of contempt for the woman. His attitude was arrogant, and he raised his chin slightly, like a peacock with its tail open. She didn't know where he got the face to be so arrogant in front of her. Go die. Qiao Mu glared at him impatiently before throwing out 2 small, round, transparent balls with a flip of her hand. The commotion caused by Su Shihua's machete had already attracted the people who were in class in the cultivation hall. When Mentor Ma rushed out with a group of students, he just happened to see Miss Qiao throw the 2 small transparent balls in Su Shihua's direction. Su Shihua smiled contemptuously. Part of the spiritual armor formed on his arm and blocked in front of him, intending to wave away the 2 small balls that were flying straight at him. Just 2 spiritual energy balls, and you want to show off in front of me? You're too naive, right? Su Shihua, get out of the way. Mentor Ma's eyes narrowed and couldn't help but roar. What spiritual energy balls? Those were obviously God power, right? These were 2 godly power balls, alright. 2. Oh my god. She was indeed the crown princess of the divine land. She could casually throw out 2 priceless divine power balls. No, now wasn't the time to think about this problem. But everyone, get into formation. Open the defensive barrier. Defend, defend. The instructor shrieked. Everyone was in a state of panic as they activated their defensive spirit artifacts. Those who had spirit armor quickly formed a spirit armor to protect themselves. The instructors took a step forward and worked together to set up a large defensive barrier. At the same time, boom, boom, 2 thunder-like tremors resounded in the small courtyard of the cultivation hall, the sound piercing through the clouds. Even the students in the other halls who were in the middle of their lessons were shocked. In the armament refining branch, a thin and tall youth who was standing beside Emolian and carefully crafting a defensive profound weapon could not help but tremble and almost put a material into the weapon cauldron by mistake. Fuck. I was so scared that my hands were shaking. The young man mumbled. The sound seems to be coming from the direction of the refining hall. Instructor Zhang from the refining hall couldn't help but look out of the window. Emolian kept a weapon in the weapon cauldron. After greeting Instructor Zhang, she quickly walked out. He felt that such a big commotion should be caused by his Jojo. When Emolian thought of this, she couldn't help but want to cover her face. Chapter 2947. When Instructor Zhang saw that everyone was craning their necks to look outside, he knew that they weren't in the mood to continue refining. So he said, "That's all for today. Those who want to leave can disperse." All the students hastily tidied up their utensils and remnants of materials. They didn't even have time to tidy them up before hastily stuffing them into their inner worlds. Then, they surged out with the large group and headed to the cultivation hall to watch the show. Cough, 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 cough. Instructor Ma forcefully waved the foggy dust in front of his eyes. He blinked his eyes twice in succession, before he could clearly see what kind of scene was in front of him. A perfectly good cultivation hall had a large hole opened up in the middle. It was at least 10 meters deep. Su Shihua had probably fallen into the hole, because no one could find him even after a long time. The little stoic expressionlessly stood next to the hole with her hands behind her back. She had the demeanor of a great master, causing people to involuntarily twitch their mouths. Although it looked like Su Shihua had been tricked quite miserably. But for some reason, everyone had an inexplicable urge to burst into laughter. No, they couldn't laugh. Su Shihua was already very miserable, so they absolutely couldn't laugh out loud. Uffed. It was unknown which dear friend couldn't hold it in, and choked on his saliva before bursting into laughter. When he saw Instructor Ma glaring fiercely at him, he hastily turned his back and pretended to cough. Student Arbor. Instructor Ma simply didn't know what to say. You. He stuttered for a long time, but actually couldn't continue. Instructor Ma actually felt at a loss for words when faced with that expressionless stoic face. Simply outrageous. Instructor Ma squeezed out these 5 words after a long time. He pointed at Instructor Gao on the side. You say it. Instructor Gao's mouth twitched. He walked forward a few steps and cleared his throat. Student Xiao, what exactly is going on? Can you tell the teachers about it? Everyone at the same time. Instructors, how big of a misunderstanding do you have about Student Xiao to think that this little fellow is someone who's willing to waste time explaining things to them? Talk to the teachers? Talk my ass. Look at this little girl's expression, she's too lazy to talk. Arbor looked at them expressionlessly, then lowered his head to look at the hole that was more than 10 meters deep. When he felt a scorching aura rising from the bottom of the pit, he knew that Su Shihua had finally recovered and was about to come up. The little stoic was expressionless. She took out another 2 god power balls from her pocket and directly smashed them into that pit under the horrified gazes of all the mentors and students. Don't. Mentor Ma was so agitated that his voice cracked. However, as soon as he said that, the 2 godly power balls bounced out. Boom, boom. Everyone was dumbfounded. The entire place was silent, except for the occasional person who swallowed hard. When Emma Lian dashed over, she almost bumped into Duan Yu's group at the entrance. He turned to look, and saw that there were actually many fellows following behind Duan Yu, who came to watch the show. The people from the pill hall also came over. Everyone gathered together and squeezed through the bamboo-fenced courtyard walls of the cultivation hall. As soon as they entered the room, they saw such a strange scene. The mentors and students of the cultivation hall looked like their acupoints had been hit, as they stood there speechlessly, looking as comical as blocks of wood. Chapter 2948. What happened? Emma Lian held back her laughter as she slowly walked towards her Jojo, looking at the situation in front of him. Was it really his Jojo who caused trouble again? Arbor glanced at him, and silently put the 2 god power balls that she was about to throw back into her pocket. A fly flew in front of me and nagged me. It's fine now. He was probably beaten half to death, and must have been taught a great lesson. What kind of girl should listen to a man obediently? Hee. This strange man actually jumped out of his own accord, and wanted to teach her how to be a person? Then he should learn how to be a person first. Arbor smirked sarcastically, and went forward to hold Emolien's hand. Suddenly thinking of something, Arbor hurriedly turned her head to look at Instructor Ma and said, I'm here to cancel my leave. Mentor Ma was so angry that he didn't know where to vent. Before he could speak, he heard the little girl rebuke. The students of your academy are too outrageous. I'm here to cancel my leave, and he actually waited for me to come. Here, there, and here. He should pay for all the compensation. Arbor pointed at the floor tiles and the potted plants that were damaged during the fight. And the time I wasted, he should compensate me according to the price. What's his name again? Arbor finally remembered to ask for the person's name. Instructor Ma, and the others didn't know what to say to her. They had seen the guilty party complaining first, but they had never seen such a vile act. This little girl smashed the person until he fell into a hole and couldn't climb out, and she still asked for compensation. The compensation isn't much, just 100,000 spirit coins. Qi Xianxian tugged at her sleeves and reminded her. Xiao Xiao, the Academy's compensation is converted into contribution points. Oh, Arbor looked at Instructor Ma expressionlessly. Then transferred 3,000 contribution points from that person's account to me. He got off easy. After that, she couldn't help but ask again. What's his name? Mentor Ma and the others all felt that encountering this guy was simply bad luck since their ancestors. Hua hua. At this moment, a voice came from outside the courtyard. He saw a man in a royal blue robe with his black hair neatly combed up. He quickly walked through the door and arrived at the edge of the pit in a few steps. At this moment, Su Shihua was also relying on his own strength to crawl to the edge of the pit bit by bit. When he looked up, he saw his elder brother, Mo Shikong, looking at him with concern. Su Shihua suddenly felt a stomach full of bitterness and grievances. All of it surged into his heart, and he wished he could cry out loud. At this moment, he no longer had that high-spirited appearance from before. He looked like a bald beggar. There was a bald patch on the top of his head, and not even a blade of grass could grow on it. He also felt a burning pain on his face. He couldn't have been disfigured by that ruthless girl, right? At the thought that his face might be ruined by the other party, Su Shihua couldn't help but panic. He kept raising his hand to touch his face. Although he was a man and didn't need to pay too much attention to his appearance, it didn't mean that he could accept a disfigured face. Big brother, big brother. Su Shihua quickly grabbed Mo Shikong's hand tightly. Mo Shikong's gaze was also somewhat complicated. His gaze turned and landed on Prince Mo and Arbor. These two were still as elegant as ever. Even if they were just standing in the crowd with indifferent gazes, there was a sense of alienation and unapproachable. Chapter 2949. Greetings, Crown Prince, Crown Princess. Mo Shikong turned around and cupped his hands in greeting towards Prince Mo and Arbor. Oh, Brother King Zheng has also come. Mo Lian nodded and responded absent-mindedly. King Zheng, Mo Shikong, reached out and pulled Su Shihua up from the edge of the pit. He turned his head to look at Arbor and asked in a low voice, how did my younger brother offend the Crown Princess to actually provoke the Crown Princess to kill him? Su Shihua's current appearance was truly a bit tragic. Mo Shikong almost couldn't bear to look straight at him. The Crown Princess' actions were too much. What kind of deep hatred could there be for her to act like this and continuously hit Su Shihua with God Power Pearls? Although Su Shihua's cultivation had already reached the 15th level of the spirit realm, he still hadn't broken through to the God realm. How could he withstand being hit by the God Power Pearls again and again? No wonder he looked so miserable now. Being hit by the God Power Pearls like this, even if he didn't die, a layer of his skin would be smashed off. Big brother. Avenge me, big brother. Su Shihua finally straightened his body with great difficulty and uttered broken syllables from his mouth. He stared in shock and anger as he said, She tricked big brother. She tricked. A trace of anger and resentment flashed through Su Shihua's eyes. He used all his strength to grab his big brother Mo Shikong's hand and stuttered. If this woman hadn't suddenly thrown so many God Power Pearls at him, how could he have been beaten to the point where he had no room to retaliate? It was simply a joke. In Su Shihua's opinion, Arbor, who used the aura-concealing talisman, was merely a little third-level spirit master. If Su Shihua wanted to crush a little third-level spirit master like this, it would be a matter of minutes. However, things didn't go as he wished. The result was that he, Su Shihua, was beaten up and fell into the pit like a dead dog, unable to climb out. This matter made Su Shihua unable to raise his head, especially in front of a few junior sisters who had rushed over after hearing the news, and who usually had great admiration for him. He simply did not know what to do. He was so angry that he was about to explode. His scarlet eyes stared at Arbor. Arbor! Pa! Before Su Shihua could figure out what was going on, he was slapped hard on the cheek. With a crisp pa sound, the corner of his mouth was slightly crooked, and he staggered back a few steps. Only when Emo Shikong reached out to support him did he manage to stabilize himself. Big brother! Su Shihua raised his hand to cover half of his face that was in so much pain. He looked at his big brother with reddened eyes. Although he didn't say anything, the meaning in his eyes was very obvious. Others have already bullied your younger brother like this. Don't you have anything to say? Emo Shikong's face was also very ugly at this time. He turned his head and looked at Prince Emo, who had personally slapped his younger brother, Su Shihua, across the air. Your Highness, my younger brother is young and insensible. He has made a fool of himself. When I go back, I will definitely teach him well. Brother Zheng really doesn't know how to teach sister-in-law. Ever since seeing Emo Shikong's appearance and the interaction between him and Su Shihua, Arbor finally understood who this man in front of her was. She finally understood why this strange man would suddenly make a move on her. It turned out that this Su Shihua was the elder brother of Princess Tao, who she had previously taught a lesson in the Despondent Pavilion. Indeed, like sister, like brother. Both of them were unreasonable people. Emo Shikong tightly pursed his lips and suppressed the anger in his belly. Chapter 2950. When he noticed the faint mockery on Xiaomu's face, the anger in his heart shot up in a flash. He almost couldn't suppress it. Crown Princess, you have already used so many divine power balls to teach my brother a lesson. What more do you want? Emo Shikong's tone was very cold, as if he had been fished out from the depths of cold water. Although he didn't say anything, his opinion of this young crown prince consort had plummeted to the freezing point. He always felt that this girl should be a shrew. If she entered the Emo family, she would definitely cause the entire royal family to have no peaceful days. Emo Lian's face also darkened, and her gaze towards King Zheng became extremely cold. Brother King Zheng, you don't understand the situation, and directly yelled at the crown princess. Do you think that all the responsibility lies on the crown princess? Was it not? Emo Shikong looked at Emo Lian with an ugly expression. He tightly clenched his fist and desperately suppressed his anger. But a wave of evil fire still burned from the bottom of his heart, and he couldn't control it. It was too infuriating. Your Highness, to be honest, if the crown princess hadn't used so many divine power balls in succession, how could Hua have been beaten so badly? In terms of strength, the crown princess won't even be able to touch a strand of Hua's hair. Was it not? Emo Shikong coldly looked at Prince Mo's icy expression. He slowly lowered his eyes and said indifferently, Your Highness should know very well whether what I said is the truth or not. You don't agree? Emo Lian turned her head and coldly looked at Su Shihua, who shrunk his neck and stood behind his elder brother Emo Shikong, and asked very forcefully. Su Shihua was pricked by the cold air released by the crown prince for no reason. He couldn't help but tremble for a while, but he forced himself to nod repeatedly. Of course I don't agree. His thoughts were basically the same as his elder brother Emo Shikong. If Arbor hadn't cheated by using so many divine power balls, wouldn't it have been a matter of minutes for him to crush the little girl in front of him with his cultivation as a level 15 great spiritual master? Arbor smirked and looked at him casually. If you're not convinced, let's continue. Didn't you say you wanted to teach this crown princess a lesson? Come. Arbor waved his small hand at Su Shihua. He looked like he was calling for a cat or a dog to come forward. The trace of mockery in his eyes was almost clearly discernible. There was actually someone who was rushing to be beaten up? Emo Lian also expressed that she didn't understand. She smiled and squeezed the little fellow's little hand. She slowly walked back a few steps, leaving an open space beside the deep pit for the two to fight. Hurry up. Xiaomu grumpily hollered at Su Shihua. Can't you generate spiritual armor? I'll also create a spiritual armor for you to see. Heh. Su Shihua was unexpectedly amused by the little fellow. You're just a little level 3 spiritual master. What kind of spiritual armor can you generate? The spiritual armor generated by normal people was a partial defense, such as the arms, chest, head, and so on. Su Shihua, for example, was able to generate spiritual armor on both arms. He thought that he was already pretty good. After all, some people could only generate spiritual armor for one arm. If he wanted to expand the range of the spirit armor, it would take a lot of effort to expand every part of the armor. Arbor looked coldly at Su Shihua, who had generated spiritual armor on both arms. Her small mouth inadvertently curled into a lazy arc. "You're a frog in a well. Arrogant fool." Chapter 2951. Today, he would let this idiot know that there was always someone better than him out there. In the future, he wouldn't easily offend some people that he couldn't handle. Arbor sneered. In an instant, a faint transparent layer of spiritual armor covered her red battle clothes like a second layer of skin, and quickly spread up. It spread from her limbs to her chest and back, then wrapped around her slender neck. It climbed all the way up until it completely covered her head. From head to toe, a full-body spiritual armor was formed in an instant. The light and thin full-body spirit armor clung to his clothes, almost as if it didn't exist. However, anyone with eyes could see that this was a peerless full-body spiritual armor. Everyone simultaneously sucked in a breath of cold air and stared fixedly at Xiaomu, as if they were looking at a little monster. This little girl could actually form a full-body spiritual armor? Weren't spirit masters below level 5 unable to form spiritual armor on their own? Why was it that when it came to this little girl, it was as if the laws of heaven and earth didn't exist? Qi Xianxian jumped up excitedly and waved her little fist in the air. "Jojo is mighty, Jojo will win." Duan Muqing and the others standing beside her wanted nothing more than to go up and cover Xuanxuan's mouth. This guy who lacked a backbone, with this roar, everyone's attention was attracted to them. Full-body spiritual armor? Su Shihua looked at Arbor in front of him in shock. He simply didn't know how to describe his feelings at this moment. The little girl actually formed a full-body spiritual armor with a wave of her hand and covered her from head to toe. Before he could react, the little girl in front of him lightly tapped her foot and rushed towards him like a speeding cannonball. That speed could almost be described as light. She was as fast as a streak of cold light and arrived in front of Su Shihua with a whoosh. Su Shihua only had time to cross his arms in front of him and block her sudden punch. Bang! The little girl's fist landed on his crossed arms, and a crack instantly appeared on the spirit armor covering his arms with a crisp crack sound. Everyone was dumbfounded. Was this the speed and strength of a level 3 spirit master? It didn't look like it at all. Is Su Shihua a rank 15 great spirit master? That's right. Not only is he a level 15 great spirit master, but he also has an 8th level water spirit. The young lady seems to have fierce firepower, but she might not be Su Shihua's match. Before the person could finish complaining, he saw the young lady throw 2 more punches. She punched Su Shihua's face. In order to block her old fists, Su Shihua had no choice but to cross his arms and guard his front. As a result, the spiritual armor that formed on his arms completely shattered with a crack under Xiaomu's 3 punches. The onlookers standing in the front row could hardly believe their eyes. What? A level 3 little soul master was able to shatter the defensive spiritual armor of a level 15 great soul master? This was simply a joke. Impossible, impossible. The onlookers in the front row could not help but raise their hands and rub their eyes. Then, they opened their mouths wide in shock, because at the same time, they saw a horrifying scene. After Miss Qiao shattered the spirit armor on the other person's arm, she pulled out a huge black axe that was even taller than her. Chapter 2957. The Crown Prince meant that if he continued to court death, he would think of a way to remove him from the position of Qingjing? Was he so much of an eyesore to the Crown Prince? Mo Shikong regained his senses and quickly ran towards the direction of the alchemy hall. Su Shihua was still alive. He could save him. He could definitely save him if his parents knew that Hua Di had died in the royal school like this. He wondered if they would cry until a hole appeared in the sky. When Mo Shikong thought of this, he couldn't help but secretly shudder. If Hua Di really died like this, then King Jing's residence would never have a day of peace. Let's not talk about how King Zheng, Mo Shikong, would go to the alchemy hall to beg the alchemists to save his brother. When Mo Lian carried his wife back to the room in the Donglin court, he kicked the door open and pulled his wife onto his lap. Without any explanation, he kissed her. He kissed the little girl until her somewhat dazed and unfocused eyes gradually became a little more focused. 2 red clouds quickly flew up on her small face. Only then did he slightly release the restraint, allowing her to take advantage of the situation to gasp for breath. When did they return to the court? Sir Jojo frowned and raised his little hand to block a certain someone's lips. What are you doing? Kissing my own wife. Isn't it a matter of course? Mo Lian's handsome face was taut as he said seriously. Sir Jojo glanced at him and snorted. He would never admit that he almost suffocated to death just now. Why did you come back? It was all his fault that he didn't accompany her to cancel her leave. Everything was not going well. I was looking for the shadow guards to ask something. Before Sir Qiao Qiao could open her mouth to ask, Crown Prince Mo, upholding his wife's words as the truth of the heavens, spilled the beans and confessed everything in full detail. The night before we went to Yunxia Peak, I arranged for them to do something at Xiaqi Garden. I left a trace of my soul and went to find Ming Yasi to fight that night. I asked them to cooperate with me. Yeah. In the end, he beat up Ming Yas so badly that he'll probably have to rest in bed for 2 to 3 days. You probably won't be seeing him for the next few days. Jojo stared at the man in front of him with his mouth agape. You beat him up? Yes. Mo Lian nodded and said with a look of disgust. It's a pity that this matter can only be carried out in secret. Even if we beat him up, we can't publicize it. Otherwise, not only will he suffer physical pain, his reputation will also be tarnished. The little fellow blinked his eyes and glanced at his exceptionally serious husband. He raised his little hand and touched his face. She suddenly reached out and hugged him, her little head swaying on his shoulder. Mo Lian, sometimes I wonder, what would I have done if I hadn't met you in this lifetime? She couldn't even think about it now. Just thinking about it made her heart ache. It felt like they had missed each other like this in their previous lives. Mo Lian was stunned. He hugged her tightly in his arms and slid his palm gently on her back. Even if it's 10,000 miles away, even if it's the 9 heavens, even if it's the Yellow Springs, it's still impossible to separate us. How is it possible that we haven't met? It's impossible. He hugged her soft body tightly and whispered in her ear. Impossible, Jojo murmured softly. She rested her head on his shoulder and remained silent for a long time. Jojo, can you promise me something? Mo Lian suddenly reached out and held her little face. He looked at her with a serious expression, his eyes shining brightly. Chapter 2959. Nothing could compare to his Jojo's smile, which made people feel comfortable. Crown Prince Mo beamed as he gazed at his wifey. He leaned close to her and whispered, How regretful, wifey. Looking at the time, we won't be able to make little Mo Lian today. The audacious Lord Qiao Qiao was actually blushing because of a few words from him. She suddenly felt that she should tease him back a little, but before she could do anything, bang! The people outside kicked the door open and rushed in one after another. Jojo, are you all right? Jojo, Qi Xianxian, and the rest froze at the door, looking at Crown Prince Mo and Sir Qiao Qiao, who were sitting in a row on the edge of the bed, their large hands clasped together as they gazed at each other. They felt like they had ruined someone else's happy occasion by foolishly barging in. Xiao Mu suppressed the smile on her lips and did her best to maintain an expressionless stoic face. What could happen to me? We've lost face in the academy, little fatty exclaimed. We were thinking, if we lost you as well. When the little fatty met Crown Prince Mo's gaze, he suddenly couldn't continue speaking. Cough cough. Actually, they were worried about Jojo. Jojo didn't look well just now, and they were all worried to death. Now that they saw that the little girl's face was expressionless, but she was obviously much more energetic than before, they were relieved. Prince Mo was indeed worthy of his name. Luckily, he was here and managed to coax Miss Qiao back. Duan Muqing looked at the two of them deeply and smiled. Since Jojo is fine, let's gather at the plaza. Plaza? Something happened in the academy. Qi Xianxian wanted to walk up and hold Jojo's small arm, but seeing Prince Emo standing beside Jojo, she didn't dare to walk over. Sir Jojo jumped off the bed and held Emolien's hand as they walked towards the door. What happened? The academy is embarrassed. Embarrassed? That poor Qin Xiu is missing. His Highness Ming Bao from Ming Province is also missing. Everyone talked as they walked towards the plaza. When they arrived, they realized that the plaza was already surrounded by a large group of people. When Principal Yun and a group of teachers arrived, everyone silently shut their mouths and looked up at Principal Yun and his group walking up the stairs. The principal frowned deeply and looked at the students. He said loudly, "I believe everyone knows what happened in the academy. Just now, the academy sent people to search the inner city, but didn't find any traces of the two. I regret to inform you that student Qin Xiu and Ming Bao should have been abducted by unknown people." The academy square immediately went into an uproar. Everyone was whispering to each other, and they couldn't stop themselves from getting excited. "Principal, did someone sneak into our academy and abduct our students?" The hothead who spoke asked the question on everyone's mind. If someone was really able to sneak into the royal school and abduct them, then this enemy shouldn't be an ordinary person. His or her cultivation should be on par with Principal Yun's. Principal Yun looked at the student who asked the question and shook his head. What we can confirm now is that the two students got lost in the inner city. Chapter 2961. How could Arbor know that the little lass was harboring this kind of hoping to get lucky mentality? After accepting the mission, they followed the large group of students and walked out of the academy. It was already dusk, and the oncoming wind was neither too fast nor too slow. Although it was a bit chilly, it wasn't bone-piercing cold. After all, they were about to enter April, and the season of blooming flowers was about to arrive. Arbor walked next to Emolien and felt the warmth in his palm as he held her hand. Emolien's physique was of the fire attribute, and she herself possessed a sacred fire. His hand was dry and warm all year round, so she especially liked it. Unlike her, her legs were always a bit cold, and when she was nervous, her palms would turn cold and damp, making her feel uncomfortable. Emolien reached out to pinch the little fellow's soft little face. "Xiao Xiao, how about we split into 3 teams to search the city, since there are about 10 of us?" Right, 3 to 4 people in a team. We have to move faster, and we should be able to search the inner city before nightfall. Qi Xianxian quickly nodded and said. Arbor glanced at the little lass and silently twitched his mouth. Xianxian shouldn't be having some strange thoughts, such as perhaps our team can complete this level 4 mission. Or in terms of luck, I only believe in my Jojo. And so on. The little stoic opened her mouth. Xianxian, we're just out for a routine stroll. She didn't need to be so proactive. In any case, there were plenty of proactive people. There were at least several hundred people who wanted to save 5th young Master Qin from this abyss of suffering, one after the other. After all, the benefits of being on good terms with the Qin estate were innumerable. Qi Xianxian quickly said, "Jojo, don't doubt luck. I keep feeling that we'll run into each other." "Where did you get this absurd confidence from?" Arbor cast her a speechless glance, then didn't bother to continue speaking. Qi Xianxian arranged for the teams to be split into 3 teams, purposely leaving Prince Mo and Arbor in one team. After receiving Crown Prince Mo's admiring gaze, she laughed heartily and ran off with her teammates. Arbor couldn't help but shake his head in amusement. He turned to Emolien and said, "Let's find a tea house and sit down." Whether or not he could find the zither cultivator and the underworld leopard was not that important to Arbor. In any case, if they were still in the inner city, they would definitely not be able to leave for the time being. After all, the dean had ordered the city to be sealed the moment the 2 students were confirmed to be missing. Right now, not to mention a person, even a fly would not be able to fly out of Wind Thunder City. Oh no. A cannibalistic barrier appeared at the end of West Street again, and swallowed the children. A loud voice exploded in their ears. They saw that the passers-by and the uncles and aunties, who had set up their stalls, all raised their carrying poles, and rushed towards this person with sticks in their hands. "What? Where is it?" Where is it? Take us there. Everyone be careful. This man-eating enchantment was very fierce. We've already gone to Ethereal Peak to ask Principal Yin for help. As long as Principal Yin is willing to descend the mountain, he will definitely be able to get rid of this vile creature. Right, there must be a demon causing mischief. It can't be a ghost, right? No matter who it is, in any case, we must eradicate it completely this time. Master Silver, Little Four is nearby. Xiuqiu's sudden words made Arbor's brows twitch uncontrollably. What man-eating enchantment? It couldn't have been that little rascal's doing, right? Today ended at 10 o'clock p.m. Fragmented Dreams. Chapter 2966. Once it escaped, its little mentality was that it didn't want to be fused with Big Brother so quickly. He really wanted to chase back the hundreds of years of time that have been sealed, and then find someone to play with it for a few days. Woo-woo, it was that simple. Arbor picked him up and flicked his little head. Alright, Xiuqiu didn't say that it was going to fuse with you immediately. As for you, you can play for as long as you want, but you can't kidnap people anymore in the future. If you want to play with them, then work hard to become their little friends. Instead of using the methods of bandits to kidnap them, the little chubby child nodded his little head as if he understood. Where's my Lian? The little fellow's face was stiff as he asked without batting an eyelid. The little chubby child weakly pointed at his fingers. He's so bad, he almost chopped me to death. If this man hadn't stopped at the last moment, it would probably have been injured and unable to continue maintaining the barrier in front of it. Arbor and the little chubby child looked at each other. So, I threw him out before. Fragment Little Four said immediately. Threw him out of my bounded domain. Out far away. Out far away. At least he wouldn't be able to find him so quickly. What a scary guy. He now understood a little why that man suddenly stopped and didn't try to destroy his barrier. It must be because that man suddenly remembered that he and Big Brother were of the same bloodline. If he hurt him, he would hurt Big Brother, which would then affect his own little master. That terrifying man had only let him go for the sake of his little mistress. Arbor really wanted to smack this little fellow's butt, but he gritted his teeth and held it in. At the side, Xiuqiu didn't care so much and directly pulled out a vine and smacked the little chubby child's butt. He snorted and said, "You're not too stupid. You guessed correctly. Crown Prince didn't attack you for Master's sake. Otherwise, with your small body, do you think you can withstand 3 moves from others? Hurry and return to Paradise Planet with me. Don't cause trouble for Master anymore. Master still has to clean up this mess for you. You're really worrying people to death. After a few hundred years, you've grown old but not wise. Why are you so foolish?" The sapling activated its nagging mode and stretched out a branch to grab Fragment Little Four, pulling him back to Paradise Planet. Another branch stretched out and wrapped around the little monk's waist without warning, causing the little monk's mumbling of "this little monk can walk on his own" to disappear into the air. Arbor pressed his small head with a headache and glanced at the bear cubs lying on the ground. With a wave of his hand, he led the group of children out of the barrier and back into the alley. She flicked a pebble from her fingertips, and it landed on the wall with a "pa" sound. Then she disappeared without a trace. Very quickly, the alley was filled with students from the royal school. The leader of the group was Wu Huanxiu, the beautiful princess. She saw a dozen children lying in the alley and couldn't help but cry out in surprise. "It's the children. Come and see. Is he your child?" His voice was like a candle that had been lit, instantly attracting all the citizens in the city. Meanwhile, the little stoic had already gone far away. Following the sapling's guidance, she chased in the direction of Emolien's aura. Just as she came out from behind the alley, she narrowly bumped into a coarse woman with a fierce-looking face. "I'm going to sleep, it's too late." Chapter 2967. The woman scowled and was about to curse, but when she looked up and saw her, it was as if she had suddenly seen a ghost. She hastily lowered her head and shrunk her neck as she walked towards the side door. When the woman stealthily walked to the door and closed it, she didn't forget to sneak a glance at Arbor. She was almost scared out of her wits by what she saw. She saw that Miss Chiao really was like a ghost as she stood in front of the side door. The woman's heart almost stopped from fright when she met Xiao Mu's cold and desolate eyes through the door crack that wasn't very wide. Bang! The woman forcefully closed the door with both hands and hastily fastened the latch. Afterwards, she panted heavily for air and subconsciously raised her sleeve to wipe the cold sweat on her forehead before slowly turning around. She then widened her eyes in horror as she looked at Arbor, who was standing in front of her and staring at her expressionlessly. Bang! The woman's legs turned to jelly from fright, and she leaned against the door, almost collapsing on the ground. Barely propping herself up, the woman trembled as she leaned against the door. She looked in horror at the little stoic in front of her and stammered, Miss, trespassing into other people's homes. What are you doing? You know me? The woman hurriedly shook her head like a rattledrum. You don't know me, but you look like you've seen a ghost? Arbor's eyes revealed this meaning, but he didn't feel like speaking. However, the woman clearly wasn't a smart person like Mo Lian or Duan Yu. She simply couldn't understand the little girl's gaze. She shuddered as she moved closer to the door. She stammered, Since you miss, if there's nothing else, please leave first. Arbor glanced at her suspiciously. He looked at her several times, until the woman's heart was about to leap out of her chest. Humph! The little girl pursed her lips in boredom, and turned around to pass through the inner wall. This time, the woman finally saw clearly. No wonder this little girl was like a ghost and silently stood behind her. It turned out that she had passed through the estate's wall. Startled, the woman hurriedly got up and ran towards the inner court. Madam. The middle-aged woman ran to the entrance of the inner courtyard and stood there, repeatedly calling inside. The door to the side room was pushed open with a creak, and a pretty maid with a round face walked out from inside. She glared at the biddy and said impatiently, Why are you shouting outside the door? Don't you know that Madam is busy? This old servant has something important to report to Madam. I'll have to trouble Miss Kai Hui to inform them. The round-faced panner girl Kai Hui couldn't help but sneer when she heard this. If you have something to say, just say it to me. Madam doesn't have so much free time to see a doorkeeper like you. What's with the noise? A woman with a snow-white complexion and slender fingers walked out of the house. Beside her was a muscular man with a bare upper body. The biddy blushed slightly, and she promptly knelt down and saluted. Greetings, madam. This old servant has something important to report to madam. This old servant saw the crown princess just now. The originally indifferent madam of the State Security Bureau was abruptly startled, and her entire body tensed up reflexively. What did you say? Who did you see? Chapter 2970. Fuck. Madame Goen repeatedly cursed in her heart. However, when she recalled that damnable ugliness at the palace banquet last time, which caused her to not dare to leave the house for more than half a month, she inexplicably felt apprehensive when she saw Arbor now. This lass was truly sinister, so she really didn't dare to confront her directly again. Arbor, I am warning you. Madame Goen inwardly shuddered and couldn't resist scolding. You, immediately put him down. Let's go our separate ways. Hurry and leave. I'll treat it as if I never saw you. Io. Before Madame Goen could finish her sentence, she was startled by Arbor, who suddenly flashed forward and hastily retreated several steps. How can you be so shameless? Arbor expressionlessly looked at her and said, Fifth young Sir Qin doesn't seem to like you, so why do you keep pestering him? Madame Goen was so angry that her face flushed red, and she couldn't resist roaring. What the hell do you know? He's already mine now. Fifth young Sir is just shy by nature, and isn't good at expressing himself. Arbor instantly loosened his grip, and Fifth young Sir felt like he was a pile of trash that the little girl threw away. When she peeked at him, it was as if she was looking at a pile of dirt, and she even hastily took out a small white handkerchief from her pocket to wipe her hands. Humiliation and anger instantly flashed past Fifth young Sir's eyes, and he exerted all his strength to move his limp limbs, but he felt powerless all over. Don't listen to her nonsense. Fifth young Sir couldn't help but panic when he saw the little girl's cold expression and how she was about to leave. He reached out to grab a ribbon on her skirt and struggled with all his might. She's talking nonsense. I don't know what the hell you two are doing. The little girl looked impatient and disinclined to care. You guys settle it yourselves. She still had to hurry and find her Lien. So how could she have the leisure to fool around with this bunch of idlers? Why you can't cough. I was caught by her. She caught me. Why you clearly know. Fifth young Master Qin was so infuriated that his entire body was trembling. He was infuriated at this young lady's aloofness and decisiveness. And he was also infuriated that he didn't have any cultivation and was just a piece of trash. He was like a fish on a chopping block, waiting to be slaughtered. Wah! He was so angry that he spat out a mouthful of blood, which formed a dark red puddle on the ground. The little stoic halted her steps and lowered her head to glance at him. When she saw that this person was truly so infuriated that his entire body was trembling, she couldn't help but pace back and forth in irritation. In the end, she still felt apologetic, so she bounced back and picked up the fifth young master again. The little stoic expressionlessly shouted at Madame Gua, "Scram!" Madame Goen was furious and couldn't help but curse. Stoic face. Do you really think I'm afraid of you? Men. As soon as Madame Goen gave the order, 4 or 5 people who looked like secret guards immediately flew behind her. Arbor glanced at her and snorted. You think you can stop me with just a few small fries? Aren't you too naive? What big words. Madame Goen sneered coldly. Take him down. Be careful of her poison. Arbor tossed fifth young Sir Qin to the side again and summoned that black pharaoh from his conscious. Several small blue flames whizzed in the direction of the secret guards. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you.